The moment I logged into my bank account, my heart sank. The balance, which had always been my source of pride and security, now showed a glaringly empty screen. For a few seconds, I thought it was a glitch, a temporary error that would resolve itself. But as I refreshed the page again and again, the reality began to settle in. My $50,000, every penny I had worked for since my first job, was gone. The air around me seemed to thicken, the walls of my small apartment closing in as panic began to set in. I checked the transaction history, desperate for answers, and there, it was, a single transfer made to an account I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the details, hoping for some sort of explanation, but instead I found a name that made my stomach drop. My father. The man who had always promised to have my back, who had preached about responsibility and financial independence, had taken everything I had. My mind raced with questions and scenarios. Why would he do this? Did he think I wouldn't notice? And most importantly, how could I ever forgive him for this betrayal? I picked up the phone, my fingers hovering over the keypad. Confronting. Him felt like stepping into a battlefield I wasn't ready for, but I couldn't stay silent. Before I could call, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from him. I know you're upset. We'll talk when you're calmer. Calmer? My anger erupted like a volcano, fueled by the audacity of his message. He didn't even deny it. He didn't even bother to apologize. My father, the man I had looked up to for so long, had stolen from me, and now he wanted to play it off. As if I was the one overreacting. Sitting there, clutching my phone, I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about trust, about family, about the foundation of everything I thought I knew. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let him get away with this. Not this time. What I didn't know was just how far this betrayal would go, how much of my world it would unravel. The journey ahead would test every ounce of strength I had, revealing secrets I never could have imagined and changing my life forever. Growing up, my father was always the man with the plan, or so he wanted everyone to believe. He had an air of confidence that could convince anyone he was in control, even when things were falling apart behind the scenes. To the outside world, he was charismatic, hardworking, and endlessly resourceful. But at home, I saw the cracks in his facade. My father was a gambler, not the fun, occasional poker night kind, but the type who chased losses, convinced that the next bet would turn his fortunes around. My earliest memories of him involve him making promises to my mother, saying he'd quit, that he'd win big and we'd be set for life. But those promises were always short-lived, drowned in the noise of his schemes and the tension they brought into our lives. Despite his flaws, he was my dad, and I loved him. As a child, I clung to the moments when he'd sit me on his lap and tell me stories of grand adventures and how he'd one day build a legacy for our family. I wanted to believe in him because to a little girl, a father is supposed to be a hero. But as I grew older, the hero I idolized began to fade, replaced by a man who seemed to care more about chasing quick money than the people he claimed to love. When I was 16, my parents divorced. My mother had reached her breaking point after years of financial instability and broken promises. She left with little more than her dignity, leaving my father and me to figure things out. I didn't blame her. In fact, I admired her strength. But it also left me with a sense of responsibility I wasn't ready for. My father leaned on me more than ever, not emotionally, but practically. I became the one keeping the household running, balancing school, a part-time job, and the weight of his ever-mounting debts. Despite everything, I worked hard. I knew education was my ticket to a better future, one far removed from the chaos of my father's life. I excelled in school, earning scholarships and taking on extra shifts at work to save for college. I dreamed of studying business, of one day starting my own company and creating a life where I'd never have to worry about money the way my parents did. Through all of this, I still clung to the hope that my father would change. He'd have moments of clarity, short-lived but genuine, where he'd apologize for the mistakes he'd made and promise to do better. And I, desperate to believe in him, would forgive him time and time again. When I turned 18 and opened my first savings account, I felt a sense of pride I'd never known before. Every paycheck I deposited was a step closer to my dreams. My father often asked about the account, joking about how I was the responsible one in the family. Sometimes he'd make comments like, "You're better at managing money than I ever was." I thought it was harmless pride in my accomplishments. I never imagined those conversations would come back to haunt me. As the years went by, I grew more independent. I graduated from college with honors and landed a stable job that allowed me to continue building my savings. My father, meanwhile, remained stuck in his cycle of debts and empty promises. We drifted apart in some ways, but I still checked in on him regularly, helping where I could. He'd call occasionally, asking for small loans or help with bills, and I'd oblige, convincing myself it was just what families did for each other. But there was always a limit. While I was willing to help, I made it clear that my savings were off limits. That account represented years of sacrifice, missed vacations, skipped nights out with friends, and countless hours of hard work. It wasn't just money, it was my safety net, my future. The first real crack in our relationship came a year ago when I discovered my father had taken out a loan in my name. I found out when a collection agency called, demanding payment on a debt I didn't recognize. Confronting him was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. He admitted to it almost immediately, claiming he had no choice and that he'd planned to pay it off before I found out. "I was going to fix it," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I just needed more time." His apology felt hollow. I made him promise never to do anything like that again, and for a while it seemed like he meant it. But trust, once broken, doesn't heal easily. From that point on, I became more guarded. I set boundaries, refused to co-sign anything, and insisted he keep his hands off my finances. I thought that would be enough to protect myself. Then came the day I checked my account and saw the balance was zero. It felt like a punch to the gut, a betrayal so profound I could barely process it. My father hadn't just borrowed money this time, he had stolen it. The man who had once told me bedtime stories and promised to protect me had taken everything I'd worked for without a second thought. I spent hours piecing together how it had happened. The account was linked to an older joint savings account I'd opened as a teenager, one I'd nearly forgotten about but hadn't closed. My father must have accessed it, transferring the money out without hesitation. The trust I'd extended to him, despite all his past mistakes, had been weaponized against me. As I sat there, staring at the empty screen, memories of every sacrifice I'd made flooded my mind. I thought about the hours I'd spent working, double shifts, the nights I'd stayed in while my friends went out, the dreams I'd carefully planned and saved for. And now, all of it was gone, taken by the one person I thought I could count on. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize his actions, to convince myself there had to be a good reason. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a moment of desperation. It was a betrayal rooted in selfishness and entitlement. My father had made a choice, and that choice shattered whatever trust remained between us. What hurt the most wasn't the money itself, though losing it was devastating. It was the realization that my father, the man who was supposed to guide and protect me, had seen my hard work not as a testament to my determination, but as an opportunity to serve his own needs. That realization changed everything. As I stood in the wreckage of our relationship, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this go. This wasn't just about holding him accountable. It was about reclaiming my power and ensuring he never did this to anyone else. What came next would be the hardest battle of my life, but I was ready to fight. The moment I decided to confront my father, my hands trembled with a mix of anger and dread. This wasn't just a conversation about stolen money. It was a confrontation about betrayal. I rehearsed what I'd say 100 times in my mind, but nothing could prepare me for the actual moment. When I arrived at his small apartment, he greeted me with his usual charm, a smile that once reassured me but now felt hollow. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice warm but cautious. He knew why I was there. I skipped the pleasantries and got straight to the point. "Dad, where's my money?" His smile faltered and he took a step back. "What are you talking about?" I pulled up the transaction record on my phone, holding it out for him to see. "Don't play dumb. You emptied my savings account." "Why?" He glanced at the screen and sighed. running a hand through his graying hair. Look, I can explain. Explain? My voice cracked under the weight of my emotions. You took $50,000 of my money without asking. What's there to explain? His expression shifted, the warmth replaced by defensiveness. I didn't have a choice. The creditors were closing in, and if I didn't pay them, they were going to take everything. Everything? You don't have anything left to take, I snapped. So you decided to take from me instead? He threw up his hands as if trying to absolve himself. You don't understand. They were threatening me. I was desperate. You didn't even ask, I said, my voice trembling. You didn't think for 1 second about what this would do to me. For a moment, he looked genuinely remorseful. But then, as if flipping a switch, he straightened up and adopted a tone I recognized all too well, the voice of someone trying to talk his way out of trouble. I was going to pay you back. I just needed time. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. You always need time, Dad. You always promise to fix things, but you never do. The conversation spiraled into a shouting match, years of unresolved tension and frustration boiling to the surface. He accused me of being ungrateful, of not understanding the pressures he faced. I accused him of being selfish and reckless, of prioritizing his gambling over his family. You think this is easy for me? He yelled, his voice echoing off the walls. You think I wanted to take your money? I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, I shot back, and you always choose the wrong one. The confrontation ended with him storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I sat there, staring at the empty space where he'd stood, my anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't the father I wanted to believe in. This was a man who saw his daughter's hard work as a solution to his own problems. In the days that followed, my father's actions only made things worse. Instead of apologizing or trying to make amends, he doubled down. I discovered through a mutual acquaintance that he had used my money to pay off gambling debts, but he hadn't stopped gambling. In fact, he was already back at the poker tables, convinced he could win back what he'd lost. When I called him to confront him again, he dismissed my concerns. I've got it under control, he said, his tone dismissive. I'll win it back, and you'll get your money. Just give me some time. Time? I repeated, my voice shaking with fury. You've been saying that my entire life. When are you going to stop making excuses and take responsibility? He hung up on me, leaving me seething on the other end of the line. The audacity of his behavior was infuriating. Not only had he stolen from me, but he also showed no remorse, no understanding of the damage he'd done. I began to take action, determined to hold him accountable. The first step was filing a fraud report with the bank. It wasn't easy. The account was technically a joint account from years ago, which meant the bank couldn't treat the withdrawal as unauthorized. But I pressed them to investigate, providing evidence that the funds were mine and that he had taken them without my consent. Meanwhile, I started piecing together a case against him. I gathered bank statements, emails, and text messages that showed a pattern of his gambling and financial mismanagement. I even reached out to some of his old creditors, hoping to understand the full extent of his debts. As I delved deeper, I uncovered things I hadn't expected. My father's debts were far worse than I imagined. He owed money to multiple gambling houses and private lenders, some of whom were known for their aggressive tactics. It became clear that his decision to steal from me wasn't just a moment of desperation. It was part of a larger pattern of recklessness and deceit. The breaking point came when I discovered he had been spreading lies about me to mutual friends and family. He told them I was overreacting, that I had plenty of money and was just being selfish. Some of them even called me, urging me to forgive him. You have to understand, one relative said. He's going through a tough time. So am I replied, my voice cracking with frustration. But I didn't steal $50,000 from him. Why does everyone act like I'm the bad guy here? The lack of support from some of the people closest to me was devastating, but it also strengthened my resolve. If no one else was going to hold him accountable, I would. The final straw came when my father attempted to access another one of my accounts. I had moved my remaining funds to a new bank, but the alert I received showed he had tried to use my old credentials to gain access. It was the ultimate betrayal, proof that he had no intention of stopping. That night, I made a decision. This wasn't just about recovering my money. It was about exposing the truth. My father had built his reputation on charm and manipulation, convincing everyone around him that he was a good man who occasionally made bad choices. But I knew better. I was tired of protecting him, tired of covering for his mistakes. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every text message, every piece of evidence. I reached out to a lawyer, explaining the situation and seeking advice on how to proceed. The lawyer was blunt but supportive. "You have a strong case," she said, "but this isn't going to be easy. Are you prepared for the fallout?" I thought about it long and hard. The idea of going up against my father, of exposing his actions to the world, was terrifying. But I knew I couldn't let him continue hurting people, especially me. "I'm ready," I said. It's time someone held him accountable. Little did I know, the battle ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. But I was determined to see it through, no matter what it took. The breaking point came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table staring at a bank statement that confirmed my worst fears. My father hadn't just stolen my money. He had drained it entirely, leaving me with nothing but the hollow promise of repayment. The anger simmering inside me boiled over into a resolve I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was war. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. After explaining the situation, she reassured me that I had a strong case for financial exploitation. "But this isn't just about the money," she said. "It's about proving his intent. Do you have any documentation or witnesses who can corroborate your story?" I paused, thinking of all the times my father had justified his actions with smooth words and half-truths. "I'll get everything you need," I said firmly. The next few days were a blur of planning and gathering evidence. I combed through old emails and text messages, finding incriminating conversations where he had hinted at his financial troubles and his belief that I owed him for raising me. I also dug into financial records, tracking every suspicious transaction he had made over the years. To solidify my case, I reached out to a few people who had also been burned by his lies. Former friends, colleagues, and even a neighbor who had lent him money only to be ghosted. Their stories painted a consistent picture of a man who manipulated others for his gain, leaving destruction in his wake. Armed with evidence, I decided it was time to confront him again, this time with a plan. I called him and asked to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe where he couldn't cause a scene. He arrived late, as usual, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. "What's this about?" he asked, leaning back in his chair as if he had nothing to hide. I slid a folder across the table, watching his expression shift from indifference to unease as he flipped through the pages. Bank statements, transaction records, and even testimonies from others he had deceived stared back at him. "This is everything," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Every lie, every dollar you took, every person you manipulated. It ends now." He closed the folder and leaned forward, his charm suddenly replaced with defensiveness. "You don't understand," he said, his tone pleading. "I was trying to fix things. I didn't mean to hurt you." I shook my head. "You don't get to play the victim here, Dad. You stole from me, you lied to me, and you didn't even care about the damage you caused." For a moment he looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "Accountability," I replied. "You're going to pay back every cent, and you're going to admit to everyone what you did." His eyes narrowed. "And if I don't?" I leaned in, meeting his gaze with a fire he hadn't seen before. "Then I'll expose you. I have enough evidence to ruin your reputation, and I won't hesitate to use it." True to his nature, my father didn't take my threat seriously, at first. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand and a patronizing smile, saying, "You wouldn't do that to your own father." But he underestimated me. I started by filing a formal complaint with the bank, presenting the evidence I had gathered. While they couldn't recover the money, they flagged his account for suspicious activity, making it nearly impossible for him to access what little funds he had left. Next, I posted an anonymous exposé on a local community forum, detailing my father's history of deceit without naming him outright. The post quickly gained traction, with several others coming forward to share their own experiences. The support I received was overwhelming, and it gave me the strength to keep going. I also reached out to a local journalist who had covered stories about financial exploitation. After verifying my claims and reviewing the evidence, she agreed to publish an article exposing my father's actions. The piece highlighted not only my story, but also the stories of others he had hurt, painting a damning portrait of a man who had spent years preying on those who trusted him. The night before the article was set to go live, my father showed up at my apartment unannounced. His face was pale, his usual bravado replaced with desperation. "We need to talk," he said, his voice shaking. I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "About what?" He held up a crumpled piece of paper, one of the flyers I had distributed in our neighborhood, warning others about his behavior. "You can't do this to me," he said, his tone bordering on panic. "This will ruin me." I stared at him, unflinching. "You ruined yourself." He tried every tactic in his arsenal: guilt, charm, even tears, but I refused to back down. "You brought this on yourself," I said firmly. "Maybe this is what you need to finally take responsibility for your actions." As he left, defeated, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The wheels were in motion and there was no turning back. The IRC article went live the next morning, and the fallout was immediate. My father's reputation was shattered as friends, neighbors, and even extended family learned the truth. Calls and messages flooded in, some expressing shock, others offering support. My father, once the life of every party, became a pariah, almost overnight. But the real turning point wasn't in the public's reaction. It was in my own transformation. For the first time, I felt empowered. I had stood up to someone who had controlled and manipulated me for years, and I had emerged stronger for it. As the dust settled, I realized that this wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about reclaiming my power, my voice, and my future. My father's actions may have caused pain, but they also ignited a fire within me, a determination to never let anyone take advantage of me again. The article about my father's betrayal went viral in our community. Within hours, his name became synonymous with deceit and manipulation. Neighbors whispered when they saw him, colleagues avoided him, and even his closest friends distanced themselves. For a man who thrived on his charm and reputation, this was a devastating blow. The bank concluded their investigation, confirming that my father had misappropriated funds from our joint account. While I knew the money wouldn't be recovered, the official report added weight to my case. Armed with this evidence, I filed a lawsuit for restitution. My lawyer assured me we had a strong case, and the court seemed to agree. When the judge ruled in my favor, it was a moment of indescribable relief. My father was ordered to repay the stolen money in monthly installments, with a strict warning that any failure to comply would result in severe legal consequences. Though it would take years to fully recover the amount, the judgment was a symbolic victory, a recognition of the injustice I had endured. The fallout from the article and court case extended beyond just my father's financial struggles. His reputation, once his most prized possession, lay in ruins. Former friends and associates came forward with their own stories of betrayal, painting an even grimmer picture of his character. One particularly damning revelation came from a family friend who admitted that my father had borrowed money under false pretenses and never repaid it. "He always seemed so trustworthy," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "But now I see it was all an act." The final blow came when the journalist who had written the exposé published a follow-up piece detailing the court's ruling and my father's failure to show remorse. It was clear to everyone that his downfall was of his own making. For weeks, my father avoided me entirely. Then one day, he showed up at my apartment unannounced, his once confident demeanor replaced with a hollow shell of the man I used to know. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his eyes avoiding mine. "I let my pride and my desperation get the better of me." I listened in silence, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to offer him a chance at redemption. But another part, the part that had suffered so much because of his actions, wasn't ready to let go of the pain. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, his voice cracking. "But I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything." His words, though sincere, didn't erase the damage he had caused. "It's not about forgiveness," I said, my voice steady but firm. "It's about accountability. You can't undo what you did, but you can start taking responsibility for your actions." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. It was the first time I had ever seen him truly vulnerable, and it was both heartbreaking and cathartic. In that moment, I realized I didn't need his apology to move forward. I had already found my closure. The journey to justice wasn't just about holding my father accountable. It was about reclaiming my own sense of worth. For years, I had allowed his actions to dictate my self-esteem, believing that his betrayal reflected a failure on my part. But through this experience, I discovered a strength I didn't know I learned to set boundaries, to stand up for myself, and to prioritize my own well-being. I reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from, rebuilt my finances, and even started a new savings account, this time in a secure, independent account that no one else could touch. More importantly, I found a renewed sense of purpose. I began volunteering with organizations that supported victims of financial abuse, sharing my story to help others recognize the signs of manipulation and take action before it was too late. Each person I helped felt like a small victory, a way to turn my pain into something meaningful. My father's life changed drastically after the court's ruling. Without his charm to shield him, he faced the full weight of his actions. His debts piled up, his social circle dwindled, and his attempts to rebuild his reputation were met with skepticism. He tried to find work, but word of his dishonesty had spread too far. Eventually, he had to downsize his lifestyle, moving into a modest apartment and selling off his possessions to make ends meet. It was a humbling experience for a man who had always prided himself on appearances. Despite everything, I still checked in on him occasionally, not out of obligation, but out of compassion. While I couldn't forget the pain he had caused, I also couldn't ignore the lessons it had taught me about resilience and forgiveness. As I sat in my newly redecorated apartment, surrounded by the life I had built for myself, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The fear and anger that had once consumed me were gone, replaced by confidence and hope. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, a picture of me at a volunteer event, smiling with a group of people who had also overcome their own struggles. It was a reminder of how far I had come and how much I had gained by refusing to let my father's actions define me. This was my victory, not just over my father, but over the doubts and insecurities that had held me back for so long. I had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to take on whatever challenges life might throw my way. And as I raised a glass to my future, I whispered to myself, "Here's to new beginnings." As I sit here reflecting on the whirlwind of events that brought me to this point, I can't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal I experienced, but for the strength I discovered within myself because of it. My father's actions forced me to confront some of life's harshest truths, but in doing so, they also gave me the opportunity to redefine who I am and what I stand for. For years, I allowed myself to live in the shadow of his charm and authority, believing that my sacrifices were a small price to pay for family loyalty. But loyalty, I've learned, is a two-way street. True loyalty should never come at the expense of one's dignity or self-respect. And when that line is crossed, it's okay, necessary even, to walk away. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's the incredible power of resilience. There were moments when the weight of my father's betrayal felt unbearable, when I doubted my ability to fight back or make things right. But each step forward, no matter how small, brought me closer to the life I deserved. Rebuilding my savings wasn't just about recovering the money, it was about reclaiming my independence. Every dollar I earned and saved felt like a victory, a reminder that I could thrive despite the odds stacked against me. And as I worked to rebuild my financial foundation, I found myself rebuilding my confidence as well. Through this experience, I've come to understand some universal truths that I hope will resonate with anyone watching. Trust is sacred. Trust is the cornerstone of any relationship, whether it's with a family member, friend, or partner. When that trust is broken, it can feel like the foundation of your world has crumbled. But while betrayal may shake you, it doesn't have to define you. Boundaries are essential. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. I learned that it's okay to say no, to prioritize my own well-being, and to protect what's mine. Boundaries are a form of self-respect, and they empower you to stand tall in the face of adversity. You are stronger than you think. When life knocks you down, it's easy to feel defeated. But strength isn't about never falling. It's about finding the courage to get back up. Each challenge you overcome adds to your resilience, making you stronger for whatever comes next. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness is a personal choice, one that doesn't require reconciliation. I've chosen to forgive my father, not because he deserves it, but because I deserve peace. Forgiveness allowed me to release the anger and pain that once weighed me down, without excusing or forgetting what he did. If you're watching this and you faced betrayal, know that you're not alone. Whether it's a family member, friend, or someone else you trusted, betrayal cuts deep. But you have the power to heal, to rebuild, and to come out stronger. On the other side, take your time. Be kind to yourself. Surround yourself with people who uplift you, and don't be afraid to seek help when you need it. Remember, your worth isn't determined by someone else's actions. It's determined by the strength and courage you show in response. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to reevaluate your relationships or your own strength? How did you overcome it? Let's start a conversation about resilience, growth, and healing. And if you found value in this story, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to my channel. By doing so, you help spread messages of hope and empowerment to others who might need them. Together, we can create a community that lifts each other up and reminds everyone that they're never alone in their struggles. Today, my life looks nothing like it did before. The pain of betrayal has been replaced by the peace of self-reliance, and the doubts that once clouded my mind have given way to confidence and clarity. My father's actions may have shaken me, but they didn't break me. In fact, they made me stronger than I ever thought possible. As I move forward, I carry the lessons I've learned close to my heart. I know now that I am capable of weathering any storm, of rising above any challenge, and of building a life that reflects my true worth. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this. No matter what you've been through, your story isn't over. The best chapters are still ahead. Here's to new beginnings. For me, for you, and for anyone who's ready to take control of their own narrative. Thank you for being part of my journey.